All right, going on with the chronological survey. Take my hat off. There's a poem about this hat. Ditty, silly little ditty. All right, this is going to end it with the Greeks, which is ridiculous because they're so important. Things I didn't mention in my speed yesterday, and I'll just touch on now, is Greek architecture influenced us greatly. It's got columns and lintels. And you know, it's funny, I here in the United States, the school where I used to teach, the high school anyway, had these columns and stuff. They were wood, they were fake. But it's so weird because this is Pennsylvania, and that's really in a sense, well, not so much the school, but houses, sometimes you see that, which was a copy of what was done in the South, in the southern plantations that had that, which was a copy of what they were doing in France, which was a copy of the way the Greeks built. People like that. I myself personally don't. It does not appeal to me. But columns and lintels. And columns go like this. Lintels are the ones that go across here. I'll maybe mention, maybe tomorrow, a documentary that explains that in terms of architecture, there's a lot to be desired in terms of engineering about that. But in any case, we have, in the columns, they'll make a fuss about the columns, that there's three kinds. There's the Corinthian columns, they have this fancy stuff at the top. There's Ionic columns and Doric columns, I think. And it's so cool that the Greeks actually didn't make them straight. They had them bellied out a little bit and down. I mean, there's a wonder there. And tomorrow I'll mention a series of documentaries that deal with that real well. All right, Greek logic, the way we think. You know, in a way, that might be the most basic influence of all, the way we think. We think like Greeks. We want things to be logical. We want things to make sense. We want to know why. With syllogisms, I don't know if I spelled that right or not. I never really studied this, but syllogisms are, if this is true and that is true, then this must be true, or something like that. Greek government, our government, democracy, they came up with that idea. Not a theocracy where God rules, or an oligarchy where the merchants rule, or an aristocracy where the rich people rule, but a democracy where the people themselves rule. It is very widespread in the world today and very much in favor. It's Greek. All right, now what I do with my students before I leave this is I try to impress upon them to what extent they are actually Greek. And I tell the kids, I usually start here, and I'll say, kids, how much of your day do you spend listening to lyrics in hours? How many hours do you think a day? You know, sometimes they'll say 4. You know, as soon as they can, they turn on their music and they listen, not just the music, but if there are words there. How much of your day do you watch TV shows or, not the news, TV shows or movies? 4 hours, it's scary actually sometimes what the kids say. Well, the news would not be, I mean TV shows with actors and commercials and movies. All right, and we're adding it up. I say, all right, now we got 6 hours, we got 7 hours, something like that. Now let's think about school. You got one class of math, that's Greek. You got one class of history, that's Greek. You've got one class of science, that's Greek. You've got a music class every day, I think that's Greek, basically our attitude. Art is not strictly Greek. But our ideas of art are very much influenced by Greek. You've got a gym class, that's Greek. How many of you play some kind of sport after school? Well, here in the United States, lots. I mean, kids may spend 2-3 hours after school playing some competitive sports. And I'll say, and we'll add this up, and you know, how many hours do we have? And you know, basically their whole day is Greek, and their whole week is Greek. I tell them that probably the time of the week that is least Greek is if they go to church, Sunday school and church. That is the least Greek part of the day in a way, because there's so much about Christianity that is not logical. That is not scientific. But it doesn't matter. That doesn't mean it's not true. The Hebrews were not Greek in their thinking. So much of that is a matter of faith, not proving things the Greek way. All right, finally, Greek. This leads us out of the Greeks. Greek philosophy, and you know, you study a whole year or a whole 4 years in college about this. But the one I like to, the most famous ones I like to mention are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And the kids once showed me that there's a little word spa that gives you that order. Well, Socrates taught Plato, Plato taught Aristotle, and Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. Well, Socrates, probably the most famous thing about Socrates is the way he died, and his teaching method. He went around getting people to ask questions. Well, the story about his death, in a nutshell, goes that he was old, and the older people didn't like the influence he was having on the younger people, and he was accused of having taught them new gods or corrupting the youth. And all he had to do was really say, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, I take it all back," but he was stubborn and he wouldn't do it. And they began to realize they were actually this was a threat to the state, and they were going to have to execute him. And he wouldn't back down. They even were going to let him go, escape, but he wouldn't back down. So he got to choose how he died. And he chose to drink hemlock poison. And the idea is that with that, his brain, his mind could stay clear right to the moment of death. He could philosophize right to the moment of death. And there's a very famous painting of him surrounded by his followers, and Plato handing him the poison. And he can't stand really to look as his teacher, his old teacher, has to commit suicide. Well, Plato, he wrote a book, The Republic, Plato's Republic. I like to point out that this is the oldest example I know of what's called a utopia, an imagined more perfect world. Plato described a government that did not exist. I think basically people say philosophers ran the government or something, but he described it in great detail. So he wrote that. He also had a philosophy about forms, which I hadn't even better go into. There are like pure forms. Matter of fact, I'm not qualified to explain this. I know that he had the analogy of a cave and a light, but you're just going to have to find that yourself if you want to. Aristotle, he had a school. The thing about Aristotle is, in my mind, is he so much loved to organize things. Let's get things organized, like taxonomy of plants and animals. Is a fox more like a cat or a dog? And how should we organize plants? Trees, bushes, or trees that stay green, trees that drop their leaves? And he had this approach towards so much. Poetics is an example. I've just shown you in the other part of the course words like iambic, anapestic, dactylic, trochaic. These words, simile, these are Greek words, metaphor. These words are Greek because we got them from the Greeks. And I don't want to attribute them all to Aristotle, but he wrote a book on the subject, Poetics. I think that one of them was lost, his two books, one on tragedy and one on comedy. I think the one on comedy was maybe lost. I'm not sure. There's a movie, a rather strange but good movie called Name of the Rose that deals with his lost book, I think. And then Alexander the Great. The thing about Alexander the Great is not so much that he was a philosopher, but he was such a successful military leader and basically conquered the known world. Sometimes I like to shock kids by pointing out that he was gay, and you think, what? That you can get away with saying that now. When I was a kid, you wouldn't have dared to even say that in class. But anyway, he died very young, and his influence was so enormous. He spread these Greek ideas throughout the known world when he conquered these places. Hellenism, Hellenic culture is what it's called, and that's going to then lead us into the Romans. And tomorrow I'm already going to leave the Greeks behind and very briefly talk about the Romans.